Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the L2 Writing Interesting Group at Titcha webinar. The title is Multilingual Writers and Technology, 4 ideas from the second language writing studying group at the 4Cs. And so we have 5 presenters here, and then they are going to share with us what technologies, tools that we can help with to help L2 writers in the writing classroom. Okay.
Hi, I'm Emily Simnitt, and I am the chair of the Second Language Writing Standing Group. And we're each going to introduce ourselves briefly, and then we'll get right into our presentation. Just a little bit of background. Our presentation comes from a workshop that we held at the 4Cs convention this last March. And our goal of the workshop was to provide teachers, administrators, writing center tutors, and others who work with multilingual writers on some hands-on tools that they could use in their own practice to support multilingual writers. So I'm going to let each of the presenters briefly introduce themselves, and then we will get started with Justin Whitney, who will talk to us a little bit about how to get started with digital technology. So if each of you want to introduce yourselves.
Hello, my name is Justin Whitney. I'm a graduating PhD student at the University of Utah, and next fall I'll be at State University of New York in the village of Delhi.
Hi, my name is Titcha Ho, and I'm a lecturer in writing at the State University of New York in Albany, and I'm also a secretary for the writing for the second language writing standing group at SEAS also.
Hi, my name is Eunjeong. I'm currently teaching at California State University, Monterey Bay. I'll be starting a new position as an assistant professor at Queens College next fall.
Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Snyder. I'm the Assistant Director of Writing Programs at Arizona State University.
Okay, thank you everyone for introducing yourselves. I neglected to fully introduce myself. I am Associate Director of Composition at the University of Oregon and a multilingual writing specialist here as well. So how we're going to go through our presentations is we'll have each person give their presentation, and we'd ask that you would hold your questions or type them into the chat, and we'll have about 15 minutes at the end of the 4 presentations to answer questions. So again, if you could send your questions or write them in the chat, we'll have those at the end of each presentation. Each presentation will be about 10 minutes, so that should give you a sense of how long we'll be going here. So let's go ahead and get started.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for coming, everyone. So my part of the workshop was about providing the opportunity for some technological learning, learning that I hoped would complement what was being discussed at the other tables. Not only did we open up a forum for sharing technological learning resources, but we also discussed ways of engaging in processes of technological learning while also using those technologies to better accomplish our professional goals. We discussed how to get better at using technology and also how to get better at using that technology to work with our second language students. What I'm going to be going over today is a newsletter that I assembled partly from my own input as well as input from other folks who attended the workshop. And you can see here that what I began with was I tried to share some of the resources that are available online, and there's a lot online. A couple of things that I might quickly draw your attention to is OWL here, which is short for.
Sorry to jump in, Justin. Could you share your screen with us?
Sorry about that.
There we go. Great. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that. Thank you very much for letting me know. Okay. Are we ready? Can you all see the right screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So where was I? I was talking about OWL. OWL Online Writing Lab has a significant amount of information on it, not just about how to write in particular genres, which is really important, but there's also a lot of information about how to cite, both in MLA and APA. So what I might also draw your attention to is EasyBib.com has a lot of information about how to cite as well. And I would say between these two, the reason I bring this up is between these two and maybe also Google Scholar, which is not listed here. There's really no reason to buy a MLA or APA citation style guide. Between these resources, there's significant information there for the vast majority of us, such that we wouldn't need to rely on a style guide. A couple other things that I might draw some attention to are htmldog.com. That has a lot of information about how to code. If anyone is interested in taking up computer programming or computer coding, HTML.dog can help you with that. And also, I might draw folks' attention to the online learning at harvard.edu. There's a lot of free online courses that are available through Harvard's online system. But the reason that I bring that up is that a lot of the quote-unquote Ivy League universities also have a lot of free online learning classes available, so you could get on like princeton.edu or stanford.edu and get a lot of free online learning opportunities there as well. So like I say, my table was about how we can both improve our own technological learning, will also improve our teaching with second language students. And one of the ideas that was floated there was drawing on presentation technologies to help such that we get better at using those technologies, but also improve our pedagogies. For example, PowerPoint. A PowerPoint can be sort of, how do I say, it can involve information throughout the whole course. That is, it can begin with like a discussion, a leaded discussion through that goes over some of the readings that happened maybe the night before. Then also includes, for example, a in-class activity that is written up on the PowerPoint that then students produce a text of some kind. That can also be added to the PowerPoint. For example, students can write something up that they can email to you, and you can add that to the PowerPoint, or even they draw something on the whiteboard and you take a picture of that, add that to the PowerPoint. But then the PowerPoint can be uploaded to the online learning platforms such as Canvas or Blackboard, so the students have access not only to the information that we're putting together, but also the information that they came up with through the class. And as a result, if we as instructors continually sort of went through that process, we would get better at producing PowerPoints as well as giving PowerPoint presentations, which may be beneficial for many. But also, students would gain access at any time to extra information that we would give, like I say, as well as what their own classmates were able to add to that PowerPoint. So that's one opportunity that we could take up ourselves in terms of what kinds of technology we could engage in that would benefit us as well as benefit our students. What might technological assistance from students look like? The reason that I included that is it's clear that a lot of our students come into our classrooms with significant technological literacies, and I would wonder how we might be able to draw upon those literacies such that the students can engage their understanding of writing or rhetoric, but we also are able to benefit from what they know about their technological usage. And one way we might be able to accomplish that would be to assign an assignment that asks students to analyze the way that the writing that they do for a digital community or any form of digital writing that they do is mediated by the kinds of technology that they use to write. So in that way, students would have to describe how, in fact, they do their writing, as well as why they do it. And if that works for us teachers, then we might be able to gain also from the kinds of information that they're giving us, while also students draw upon their technological literacies to engage in the classroom discussions of writing and rhetoric. Let's see, moving forward from there, I have one last slide. Going digital. Basically, when I talk about going digital, what I mean is accomplishing goals through digital technology that we used to accomplish through material or analog resources. I went paperless about 5 years ago, and my life has really benefited from it. But partly of what I'm curious about here is how we might be able to go digital in ways that help us, that make our lives easier, but also make our lives easier for our students as well. For example, I might ask how we might be able to do peer reviews online. In my own research with Korean international students, what they say is that they benefit a lot from peer reviewing. There's a lot of progress, they say, that comes from being able to sit down with someone and talk to them about why they made the writing choices that they make, and also just get a sense of what other folks in their classes are writing. But what's difficult for them, however, with what they tell me is that on one hand, it takes longer to do the peer review. It takes longer for them to read through someone's writing and to provide substantial commentary. And additionally, students don't particularly enjoy peer reviewing or having someone read their own writing right in front of them. So they would prefer, they don't mind it when other people read their writing, but would prefer not to do it face to face. So I might ask then how we might be able to go digital with the peer reviewing, such that our second language writers can have more time to read and to respond to their partner's work, as well as where they don't have to sit in front of someone as someone is reading their work. And I think that is all for me. I'm going to go ahead and hand it off now to Eunjeong.
Thank you very much, Justin.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Eunjeong again. I'll be talking about using Screencast software in Alto Writing Classroom today. As some of you may be familiar with, Screencast software can capture your screen. It allows you to record both the screen and webcam, including the sound that your computer produces. And with this function, you can incorporate multiple modalities in providing feedback or other aspects of writing instruction. And particularly for the writing feedback, which is where we writing teachers spend a lot of time and labor and energy, research has shown that using screencasts in writing feedback helps to build a rapport with students and encourage students to attend the feedback more carefully, because by using the screencast, you're having to watch a video, which includes explanation of feedback or other aspects of the student writing provided by the teacher. Justin just mentioned about how this can be very anxiety provoking, and a lot of researchers have focused on how this can reduce the anxiety and therefore also helping students to build more rapport or with each other through this technology. Also for me personally, screencasts also made me more conscious and reflective of my own feedback practice, because it really forces me to prioritize and be selective in giving feedback on student writing, because you have to think about how you're going to organize the feedback and what you're going to talk about first, second, and third, and how long it has to be, and so on and so forth. So here's a screenshot of a screencast software called Screencast-O-Matic, which is what I use typically in my class. As you can see, here's the recording button at the bottom. I apologize, I guess the screen didn't capture everything, but here at the bottom, there's supposed to be a record button, including pause button, just tiny bit, you can see it. And you can select which screen you would like to share and whether you want to include your narration, so on and so forth. The box here, the boundary that you see with dashed line, means you can select a portion of the screen that you would like to share. So with that, you can perhaps have a small note next to the screen that you would like to share with your student, just as a cheat sheet. This is another screenshot of me giving a student feedback using Screencast-O-Matic. One good thing about Screencast-O-Matic is, along with some of other softwares, you can save using multiple formats. You can just save as a video file, or you can upload directly to Screencast-O-Matic Cloud, which is given to you when you sign up. You can also make this into a YouTube video and have students save up in their Google Doc or any other software that they are familiar with. Also, if your institution supports Google Drive, this is a good way of selecting feedback so students have easier time to go to feedback. So with that, there are other ways to use Screencast-O-Matic or other Screencast software in your writing instruction. You can use Screencast to model academic literacy practices and strategies, which oftentimes L2 writers, especially if they're beginners, have difficulty getting used to. So what I do oftentimes is that I record my own think aloud while I'm reading a student paper or a portion of the text that my students will read, and show how I often go back to the assignment sheet or rubric. Or I purposely refer back to some of the discussions we had in the class to reinforce those ideas. Or sometimes I show how I would use dictionary or corpus tools, library research, or any other online tools beneficial for multilingual writers. I have students watch my screencast with the Think Aloud and ask them to identify different strategies I use to understand the reading, or how some of the choices that the authors made in the paper seem to influence the reader's understanding. And particularly for the international students, they often talk about how it was interesting to see me as a teacher who also used English as a second language, still kind of looks up things, new words, or use other tools while I'm reading that I didn't know. And I think this oftentimes helps students to see language learning is not something that be done one time, done, but it's something that we always do throughout our life. Another thing that you can do with your students is to teach them how to use Screencast if you become familiar with this software, and actually have them use it. So one way that I use this Screencast with them is have them record themselves doing an assignment called Letter to the Readers, and also peer review. So let me explain one by one. I adapted an assignment called Letter to the Reader by Sandra Gills, where students have to write a kind of cover letter for their essay and talk about what they intended for the essay to do to the readers, who their intended readers are, and also what part of their paper they're proud of and need help with. And then their peer review partners should respond directly to the author, also using Screencast. These assignments help them to think about their writing as an author and also provide more specific feedback to their author, since they have to show where in the paper they're providing their feedback on. So this takes a little bit of learning curve for me to, and for you to teach your students on, but once they get used to it, this can be very effective. Helps them to understand what it means to give feedback, what it means to introduce their writing as an author. So this resulted oftentimes in a lot of specific and productive discussion about their writing. There are also a few caveats to think about when you're using Screencast. As with any writing feedback, you might want to think about how your students will find this useful. So for instance, some of my students have multiple part-time jobs, and they have told me that it's a little bit difficult for them to secure a place and time to listen carefully to my feedback. So you might want to think about who are my students and among whom this screencast may be more helpful or not helpful. Similarly, think about which areas of feedback this can be most effectively used for. So for me personally, I have used this more to discuss higher order concerns where I have to explain the general principles of academic writing and making a connection to their own writing. So I have used a lot for higher order concerns in the beginning of the semester. And also, if your class has a lot of listeners with lower proficiency, you may also want to think about how you could scaffold your screencast feedback further. So I tend to use both written and oral feedback, so this will help them to locate which area in their paper they need to work more on. And another way for you to scaffold further is to have students mark on their own draft while listening to the feedback. So what I suggest is that I ask them to open up their paper in one browser and open up my screencast feedback in another browser and mark down whenever they hear of particular feedback directly on their paper. So that way you keep them accountable as to whether they actually listened and understand the feedback. And of course, as you use the screencast, it's important to check with your students how they find this helpful or effective or difficult. So that way you can continue to modify the way that you're using screencast. You can also use the screencast more strategically with different purposes. For instance, in teaching some of the basic academic or other literacy practices, it will be helpful for students to see your entire process of reading from the very beginning. Very beginning, I mean to start downloading their paper and open up and get ready for the reading, etc. And this often teaches students about other things, more than just writing feedback, such as how the way they save their file, formatting like double space, things like that are important for the reader actually. And once students are familiar with how their paper is often read, so this, you can perhaps do more of this kind of screencast feedback in the beginning of the semester in a way to kind of socialize them into the typical or expected norms and conventions in academic literacy and also the interaction with the teachers. And once your students are more or less familiar with how their paper is often read, you could also organize your feedback differently. You can organize your recording based on higher order versus lower order concerns. And or just use screencasts for grammar feedback. Spend more time on a particular issue their paper seems to convey more or less, and just create screencasts focusing on that. And finally, make sure your video is not too long. A lot of research has focused on this aspect as well, and given my personal experience and also the research, the test, that anything longer than 15 minutes was a little bit too long for my students to watch. And that's when they start really losing focus. And I would even recommend that make your video ideally 10-minute long, which really forces you to prioritize some of the things that you really want your students to attend to. So I hope this talk gave you an opportunity to think about how you could utilize Screencast as a resource for you and your students. And if you would like more discussion or any comments, please wait until the end of the talk. Thank you.
All right, can everybody see my screen? Yes, great, wonderful. Well, my name is Sarah Snyder. I'm the Assistant Director of Writing Programs at Arizona State University, and today I want to talk to you about using Google Docs to facilitate high-quality peer review and a little bit of plagiarism detection. So, like Justin said in the beginning of the presentation, peer review can be a troubling time for L2 writers. Often L2 writers need more time than what's available in class to read their colleagues' writing. Sometimes they need instruction about the language for and the genre of peer review. Sometimes they need mediation to overcome perceived helplessness. So they're thinking, I am just learning the language. What kinds of feedback can I actually give to my peers? And as we all know, they usually have some good feedback and some notions that may need to be mediated. They also need measures of accountability, because peer review has been a pretty much ephemeral activity, right? Like, it doesn't always lead. Oh, there will be time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. I just got that from the TESOL. So you can definitely write your messages in the chat, but we'll address them at the end of the presentation. So thank you. And so students also need measures of accountability, like, did you actually do peer review? And they also need record of feedback given so that they can take it all into account when they're getting ready to actually revise their papers. There are a couple of more issues, but these are the ones that we'll deal with today. So I would like to present Google Docs for peer review. And the first step, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Google Docs, and I can fill in some of this information later, but the first step is to teach the student how to use the comment button. I'm jumping right into Google Docs. First, you would highlight a chunk of text, and the comment button, that little plus button, will appear. And first, you also have to make sure that students understand that if they don't press comment, then their comment will not be posted or be saved. So just make that really clear from the beginning, because I've had students who are like, I did all this and we can't see it. So kind of disappointing for everyone. Step 2, you have to teach the students language to do peer review and to devise a protocol by which you'd like your students to write their comments to their peers. For example, this is a shortened version. You will write 3 substantive comments to each of 3 peers. Grammar feedback is extra credit. So I'm asking the students to work on the higher order concerns. And if they feel like giving grammar feedback, they get a little bit of extra credit. But again, I have to go and mediate that grammar feedback sometimes. The most important thing here, I think Keith Foltz would say, is teach the students language to do the peer review and to give them clear instructions. I define a substantive comment by 2 multiphasic steps. First, you're going to identify what you're reacting to, so that's the chunk of text that you highlight. And then you're going to say, I'm reacting to this because blah, blah, blah. And then the second sentence is usually, I would change it to, okay, this is the little prompt that I give them. I would change it to this, blah, 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 because blah, blah, blah. So we're giving them both the genre of peer review and the language to do peer review. Now, step 3 is the most important step probably, and I think where Google Docs really shines for peer review. It helps you hold students accountable for their work and mediate the peer review process. As a teacher, and you'll see one of my comments to one of my students there, as a teacher, you'll see that you need to make sure that students know that you're looking at their comments. And like I mentioned earlier, there are some students who think, you know, I'm just learning the language. What could I possibly give to my peer that would be helpful? Well, here you can also explain the Lundstrom and Baker 2009 paper that it's actually better to give peer review than to receive peer review. But also you're going to make sure that the student feels that you have corroborated them if the student is correct. So confirm what the student has to say to their peer if they are correct. And if the student is operating under a different code or giving misleading feedback, you might bring up some questions for the students to consider to reply to, and then also address these issues in class. These end up being some of the most interesting conversations that I have in my class. So, you know, someone said this on your paper, but did you agree with it? Or how does the whole class feel about that? It's a very generative prompt for a discussion. Now, step 4, I think is really important because students can be spending a lot of time on peer review. First of all, it takes a long time to read these papers. It takes a long time to, you know, put together a substantive comment. And then it also takes a long time to incorporate this into your papers. So I also do something called a revision plan that says, you know, this is the feedback that I got, and this is how I'm going to use it in the future or for future drafts of this paper. But the most important part of this is to grade the actual peer review. So I have students basically, say this is 1 out of 3, 2 out of 3, 3 out of 3. And then we also create a grading rubric with my students to make sure that they understand the requirements, and then I can give them specific feedback based on what they've done well and what they could do better in. And I also give them multiple opportunities, at least the first time, for students to grasp this concept. It is really a higher level thinking activity. It's basically writing about writing, and it takes a few attempts to get right. And it also takes a few attempts for students to understand that they have things to bring to the classroom. So I'm going to move over quickly to plagiarism detection. So Google Docs is also helpful for plagiarism detection. But the first thing you have to do is make sure that you set up your course Google folder correctly, because basically how this works is that the students are going to be drafting in their Google Doc. If you don't have the students draft in their Google Doc, this isn't going to work. And if you don't own the Google folder, you won't be able to see where the students are drafting and what they're drafting whenever you want, because they'll have to share these with you. So the first thing, set up your Google folder correctly. Make the master course Google folder with your official school account, because they often have unlimited storage. I made that mistake. I have to pay every month for Google to hold all of my documents because I've been using my personal email. So I made that mistake for you guys, and you won't make it in the future. Then you need to share this folder to students only with their official school accounts, because then that keeps the naming of the comments and who these people are. It keeps it really clean for you. And then you can give them access to the folder for the drafting folder. But if you're going to also host your syllabus or other prompts or rubrics perhaps that you don't want them to edit, you would give them view only or comment only permissions. Then you'll teach the students to create their own document within your Google Drive or your Google folder, and then you'll require students to draft their papers in Google Docs. Now, the second really important step for this is that you help your students understand why Google Docs can help them understand the concept of plagiarism and protect them from plagiarism. So you're going to explain to your students that drafting in Google Docs is there for their protection. Okay. Number one, Google Docs creates a second-by-second history of your document, so you can prove to your teacher or colleagues how your paper has progressed, or you can, if there's any question about like where this material came from or in what span of time this material came from, it's no longer the teacher's word versus the student, because we know that power dynamic is kind of treacherous for students sometimes. And they can be using this technique in their other classes as well, so you're kind of giving them insurance for their other classes. Google Docs also auto-saves every second, so there's no more lost papers, there's no more my cat or my dog ate my paper, my bunny ate my paper, right? There's no more, and Google Docs also allows the teacher to see where you are at any time and if you need help. So I use this particularly when I see students haven't started their draft, maybe like a couple of days before the rough draft is due, and I'll probably just send them a little message that says, hey, what's going on? Do you need help? Can I help you brainstorm? Is there anything that isn't making sense? Like, why haven't you started yet? And then obviously I require students to draft in Google Docs. So if you find that one of your students is perhaps, there's a little bit of inconsistency between their language or their writing, or you suspect that maybe they're not citing correctly because maybe they don't know. Maybe it just never sunk in, right? If you do suspect plagiarism in your students' documents, you can check students' documents with the version history function of Google Docs. And you can flip through the dated versions to find large chunks of text that were copied and pasted, because they'll show up in like 1 second, right? So you'll see in the second versions or the second-by-second versions that text will show up, it'll be a little trickle of text, and then all of a sudden there will be this big hunk of text that was copied and pasted in 1 second. That's usually a red flag for me that I need to like show the student that I saw this and we'll go back to it and make sure that they understand what just happened. Now, it's really important to make sure that we are using this as a teaching tool, and we're checking this early and often during the drafting process so that we can have time to have these conversations with the students, so that we can use these as teachable moments. So, but if you really want to have fun with Google Docs and making sure that students are understanding how to use Google Docs to the nth degree, you can use an extension for Google Doc or Google Chrome called draftback, and it actually allows you to play back the changes that you've made to a document like a movie, and they'll be able to see, they can observe their own writing process, they can observe just how much work they did, they can observe a lot of things and use it for their reflections in the future. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them later on in the presentation, but thank you for being here today, and I hope this helped.
Hi, can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Okay, so my part is about using technology in the writing center. And so my name is Titcha Ho, and I'm a lecturer at the Writing and Critical Inquiry over at the State University of New York at Albany. I'm also finishing with my PhD in Composition and TESOL over at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. So the project that I'm talking about right now is actually what I did when I was working as a writing center multilingual writing specialist over at Baruch College in the State University of New York. So we, for my context is that we have about 23 students, 23 professional consultants, and they are writing teachers at other schools in either in the CUNY systems or in New York City in general. But for majority of the writing consultants, they're actually not trained to talk about grammars and language issues, but we actually have about 80% of the students who actually come to the center regularly actually ESL or EFL student. So for the student part, we also have a lot of students actually said it's not really confident. The grammar feedback that they get normally, they would say, oh yeah, my grammar is bad. And then the actual problem is actually normally word choice. And the students also tend to use high level vocabularies that actually kind of out of context. If they go to a dictionary, they would actually pick the one that, let's say, they think is the most fancy one, and they actually think they would go with it, but again, doesn't go with the context that they're trying to say. So for this tool, wordandphrase.info is actually going to be kind of addressing that issue of how to fix it. So what does that type of problem look like? So for example, this is a student writing sample. So in a personal essay applying for an internship position, so one student wrote, I relish working in health policy. I have a robust work ethic. And one student actually wrote about valet parking as underutilized spaces. So this tool actually give our consultants, so I also use this tool to teach my student in class, is actually kind of helping students kind of having more choices in terms of what would be the kind of concerning more on the word usage as opposed to gravitate toward the word that actually for them sound fancy, because for some reason too many ESL writers, they feel that, well, I want to sound smart, therefore I have to use the most difficult sounding vocabularies. And also it does address the grammar issues. So let's say issues of phrasal verbs, for example, because I mean, as an ESL student myself, it was actually like when we learn English, we actually learn just the word, but like sometimes like just something like participate in, for example. So we learn participate, we don't learn in. So these two actually come in to actually help our student with this issue. So this is what the website look like. It's called wordandphrase.info. It's pretty much a simplified version of COCA, which is a Corpus of Contemporary American English. When you go to this page, you click on frequency list. Since this is a simplified version of COCA, so it doesn't have all the word, but it does have like, I guess like I would say for advanced learner, it does have like a vocabularies that actually up to that. And then it can only search one word at a time. So this is what the interface look like. So normally what I actually concentrate inside is this collocated sections right here. And then, but you would also do, I also use the genres a lot because a lot of the time, especially let's say if you have US resident student, sometimes they would actually, so they would write like the way they speak. So in that case, I would actually using this to kind of like say the word they use actually more spoken language, is actually not academic, or if student actually shows us the word that's really rare that people don't use it at all. In that case, I will point out like, well, you see that no one really uses this word. But it does give student agency in terms of choosing what word to use. So I think what we emphasize at the Writing Center is that you're not just giving the exact one word for a student to use, so not supplying the answer, but giving them agency in terms of like what are the different possibilities that they actually can work with that like word uses. And since we don't have a lot of time today, so there's actually I look up this tutorial that actually done by the Writing Center at Duke University. That's actually like pretty good. And then for the training material that we and also handout from other workshops that we talk about today is actually on this link that is right here. And then that's my email address, and I think we can go to the question part.
Okay, we can take questions now. Before we get started on questions, I did want to just reiterate what Titcha said about where you can find additional information about that was presented during this session. The Second Language Writing Group does have a website at secondlanguagewriting.wordpress.com. And we put our workshop materials there, so you can actually go and get access materials from our last several workshops at 4Cs, and versions of the materials that were presented during this webinar. That was one of the questions that I saw in the chat. I don't know, do other people have questions they'd like to ask any of the presenters? I mean, okay, it looks like there is, we have a question for Sarah. How often do you look at student papers in Google Docs before the peer review or grading?
Hi, Stacy. That's a great question. Well, it depends on
the feel of the class. Like if everybody's seeming like they really understand, I will probably focus my attention elsewhere. Otherwise, I usually check, like a couple of days before the rough draft is due. I'll do a quick check on everybody's documents and say, like these are the students that I might need to follow up with. These are the students that look like they have it, and I'll like leave them a little note that says, hey, doing great. Takes me about 15 minutes per class to do that. And then, so before peer review, that's what I do. But between peer review and grading, I'm usually like really interactive with my students. Like we have a couple of times where, I'm reading student papers in class and we're looking at student papers, or we're creating our revision plans. So it really depends on the class. Sorry, that's the best answer I can give you. But I love Google Docs because I can basically look at the students' papers who may be struggling or who may not be in contact with me. Like I don't have to wait for the student to be in contact with me to know that they're struggling, because I can see their paper anytime. Like I can look at it at 3 a.m. Of course, I'm not gonna intentionally do that, but if I wanted to, I could. So I hope that helps. Did that answer your question? You can turn your mic on and ask a follow-up if you want, or.
I think actually we should sorry to I guess butt in, but if
Sure.
we use the chat for questions, then it might be easier to just sort of keep track of what people are asking.
It looks like there's a question for Eunjeong.
Yeah, that's where what I was going to go to next. So the question for Eunjeong is that I wonder if you conducted your study with Screencast and L2 writing instruction from teachers' perspectives, native English speaking versus non-native English speaking teachers. I'm just curious about teachers' reactions as well, because it's definitely a different mode of feedback from the conventional wisdom. So Eunjeong, do you want to?
Sure. Thank you so much for that question. And that's something that I have also thought about. So far, a lot of research, I think, on this screencast feedback is done in more or less what they call mainstream L1 composition, where there are some L2 writers, but in response to student teacher feedback, there wasn't really much highlighted portion. I think the only, I'm sure, as far as I understand, there are more research that are coming up on using screencast feedback in L2 writing context, either English as a second language or English as a foreign language. I myself have not conducted a study with this topic. I have mainly approached this today's talk from my experience of using and my understanding of what research says. I would say, given my interaction with my students, especially L2 writing students, they have a mixed feelings in terms of building relationship with me and kind of lowering down the anxiety about opening up and looking at teacher feedback. I believe screencast feedback was definitely helpful for them to be more relaxed about looking at the feedback or understanding or listening to teacher feedback. In terms of making sure that they understand what part of paper that they really need to focus on, I needed to provide a lot more scaffolding. So reflecting on my own practice, when I first heard about screencast, I believe I thought this was going to be really, really a good tool. This is going to save me a lot of time. I would be honest that this doesn't necessarily save the time. It's just, I would say this provides a different way of interacting with students while giving a feedback. I don't know if that answers the question, but thank you for this an idea. I think there's something maybe I will explore further in my next research project.
Great. Thank you, Eunjeong. Now we have a question for Titcha about students using results from COCA. I find that they are overwhelmed by the confusing screen of text and the results. They can't read across the context very well. So it's a very teacher-dependent activity. So I guess that what Titcha might respond to is her experience with how students have used had experience with the COPA.
Okay. Hi. So I think for my when I use this in class, that's why I actually go to wordandfresh.info instead of actually going directly to COCA, because when our the writing center director actually asked us to create the project to train the tutors, they I wanted to do COCA, but then it was too overwhelming. In that case, that's why we go to wordandfresh.info. And I think if I'm going to try, can I share my screen? Let me see. Can you see? Okay. So if I do, can you see my screen now or no? Okay. So if if you go to frequency list, it's only look up one word at a time. And then you have to use, let's say, for example, in the example that we were looking at was robust work ethics, for example. You kind of have to play with it a little bit, like how you actually solved it. But then, so in this case, it's only look at one word at a time, and it's go directly to the collocations. It's go directly to the collocation part of it. So like, cause we did use collocation dictionary in our at the centers, and also in my right now teaching ESL composition class also. But in this case, it's almost like having the electronic version of the collocation dictionary. So in that case, like they don't have to actually using the actual physical dictionaries. I think that's how I look at it. But yes, I did find COCA a little bit difficult. It's even more difficult to actually navigate. That's why I gear toward that's why I go toward the wordandfresh.info one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Titcha. We'll go back to another question for Sarah now. This question is about students, engaging students with Google Docs from somebody who has used it and had maybe some issues with some difficulty in with students seeing the benefits of drafting in Google Docs. So how do you convince or engage students who haven't been able to see the benefits of Google Docs for drafting?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are a couple of things that I have to keep in mind, Renee, when I'm using Google Docs in my classroom. Number one, I'm always asking for a mediated classroom, which means that all of my students have computers already in the classroom waiting for them. So first of all, the access to technology is really difficult sometimes for some students. So I'm also, willing to switch, very quickly to paper or, Word docs if it's creating the student some kind of, difficulty outside of class. But the other message, the empowering message that, this is your insurance. Like if you were ever to have a teacher maybe accuse you of plagiarism, you could show them this playback and say, like, look, this is me typing all of the words from my own head, and they would know the difference between that trickle of typed words versus the that chunk of copied and pasted text that just shows up in 1 second, because that's, the biggest indicator that they're doing something. And then also that it's on their official school account for Gmail or Google, and they can say, like, I own this. It's not exact because someone could be typing on their computer, right? Like it's not exact, but it's a great tool to empower students with if they feel like they need that type of insurance. Especially for our second language writers who may, they may be dealing with teachers who don't know all the different types of plagiarism and are painting it with a broader brush, so to say. So yeah, I'm happy to take questions offline too. So my email is sesnyder@asu.edu, scSnyder@asu.edu. Any other questions?
I'm sorry, I accidentally muted my microphone. I think we have a time for maybe a couple more questions. There's another question along the same lines for Eunjeong. Someone wondered if you could share some comments from your students about receiving screencasting feedback, especially since this might be something that is new for them.
Sure, let me elaborate a little bit more. So my classroom is very mixed. I have students, L2 writing students with visa, international students who learned English in EFL context, and I also have so-called Generation 1.5 students who we often also describe as ear learner, and I also have students who use English as their first language. So I have a variety of groups of students. So oftentimes, if I draw a line somewhere there, my international students often didn't appreciate as much. They liked that they could see me and me talking to them directly. But when it comes to asking them, how did you understand my feedback? And of course, this may be on me and not clarifying my feedback, but oftentimes they said it was easier for them to read the feedback in a written form, and which is why I started using both and oral form of giving feedback in Screencast. My Generation 1.5 students really kind of like that I explained it. They said it made them feel like I'm really talking to them, and it was easier for them to understand what I was wanting them to work on in their feedback. So I think it's important to check with them after you try your Screencast feedback first, and then see how students respond, because there could be individual differences as well. But my rule of thumb based on my interaction with this multiple groups of students is don't completely rely on just giving oral feedback. Scaffold that with some sort of another modality, providing some written feedback as you're saying, or type some of what you're saying in summary as you're giving an oral feedback, or highlight on student paper, or come up with some sort of a color coding scheme that you and your students and you feel comfortable about. So that way it's not just one-sided. I think the beauty of using the Screencast is having multiple modalities. So I think it's up to you to utilize that as much as you can and think about how your students can benefit from that. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Eunjeong. It looks like we are about out of time. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank TESOL for allowing us to have this venue to talk a little bit more about the really great ideas that we pulled together for our workshop at 4Cs, and to again give you the website for our group where you can find more information, secondlanguagewriting.wordpress.com. So I don't know if there is anything else that we would need to if there's anything else that you need to or have questions of, you can email us, any of us, and we hope to hear from you. Thank you.
So on behalf of the L2 Writing Interest section at TESOL, so I would like to thank all the presenters and thank for sharing us with the very practical knowledge and we can use in the classroom. And we will post the YouTube version of this webinar later when it is available, and we will announce it on the listserv. Right. Thank you so much, everyone.